Hello, everyone. This is the Tech Surge Deep Tech Podcast presented by Celesta Capital. Each episode, we spotlight issues and voices at the intersection of emerging technologies, company building, and venture investments. My name is Sriram Viswanathan, founding managing partner at Celesta Capital. Today, we are pleased to welcome Mark McLaughlin, a renowned executive investor and board member in the technology world. He is highly accomplished. Mark, of course, served as the CEO and chairman of Palo Alto Networks for many years, following a decade-long stint at VeriSign, where he was the president and CEO. Mark currently serves on the board of Qualcomm as the chairman. He's also on the board of Snowflake, Rubrik, Snorkel. And Mark, you and I got to know each other in the context of a couple of companies that we were involved in. But I've always known you during the last, 10 plus years of the various things that you've accomplished. And I've always sort of, admired what you've been able to do. But I think as our audience will come to appreciate, the journey that you've taken is almost as interesting, if not more interesting, as much the accomplishments that you've had and some of the decisions that you've made is, I'm sure, going to be super interesting for our audience. You're widely recognized as a leader in cybersecurity and data protection. And you're also, part of the Obama administration's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee, I understand. So that'll be interesting. And given the world that we live in with CrowdStrike and everything else, I wonder what the new administration, whenever it comes up, and how much of a focus they're going to make in cybersecurity. So Mark, thank you very much for joining us. I'm super excited for this conversation. Welcome on board.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
So Mark, I think, you have a very unique background because, I'm not sure if you were really trained in technology because you went to West Point and you were probably in a different universe. You may have had a different career, but you spent quite a bit of time and, something happened that changed that trajectory for you to jump into technology. So can you talk about that early days and what were some of the things that you experienced in West Point that I'm sure you are probably using it even today, professional life, but talk about that time and what made you switch to technology?
Sure. Well, the summary would be I didn't have a plan, or I had a plan and then I didn't have a plan, right? And learned a lot in life about that. But so I had the privilege to go to West Point. That is the only thing I ever wanted to do. I don't know why. I'm not from a military family or anything like that. But if you caught me at 6 years old, I would have told you that. And then my desire was to just be in the Army. And that was my intended career. I was very fortunate to get in. I don't know if I could get in today, almost certainly not. But I got into West Point. And then after I graduated, I became a pilot, helicopter pilot. And then a while after that, unfortunately, I was in a helicopter accident. It was nothing super dramatic, no fireball, stuff like that, but just enough that I ended up getting injured and then medically discharged. So the point of all that was, I had a plan and then that plan ended.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Coming out of that adversity, you chose technology as the path when you could have done, very many other things, or perhaps even, being depressed about, what's happened at that time. So was that switch to technology, was that a conscious decision or was it?
No, candidly, it wasn't. And this is another something I'll tell young people as well is, some people, everybody's wired differently, right? And some people very much benefit from a life plan. They're 25, right? And you talk to them and they say, here it is, right? Boom, boom, boom. And I got it all planned out, right? And to some extent, maybe that works, for people. That's not the way I was wired. And I'm not sure that's a great way to think about things because who knows, right? If you set the worst thing in life is missed expectations. Mm-hmm. So when you set expectations, they're only yours. And then if you miss them, nobody really cares about it except you, but you can get yourself in a really bad place.
Right. It's kind of like this classic equation, happiness equals reality minus expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So in my case, like I said, as broken down helicopter pilot, wasn't sure what I wanted to do, what I could do, what people would let me do. And I decided to go to law school, not because I really wanted to be a lawyer, but I said, I need to get a profession to support myself and her family, right? Mm-hmm. So I did, and was able to get into law school. And I went to law school, and it was only there studying intellectual property law that I actually started to get interested in really intellectual property, not so much technology, but they were clearly associated. And I was in Seattle, and
Right.
And then I had the opportunity. Again, it was an opportunity really not deserved in any way, but I was able to come here after graduation and start to practice with Cooley Godward back when I was a very small firm, and in the technology practice, which was a very small practice, and do work in the tech space. Got to work with tech companies and got interested in the technology itself in Silicon Valley. But it was really the law, the legal career that brought me here.
I mean, this is an amazing arc if you were to think about it. From the time that you did IP in Seattle to being chairman of Qualcomm, which is arguably a company that's built on foundations of IP.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a story. Did you at that time, you're talking 90s, early 2000 timeframe, the internet was just, exploding. Cyber security and all of that was still not as center stage as it is today. So VeriSign must have been it was a sort of, may have been perceived as a niche player. I mean, did you realize that cyber was going to be such a big deal 10, 20 years later?
I would like to say yes to that. And I think perhaps to some extent, right? And you've been around, and a very, very experienced guy too. And, for me, I can only speak for myself to say, how many major tectonic shifts have we lived through? Mm-hmm. Payments, the web, like the browser, right? Cyber, SaaS, cloud, right? Now AI. You can go down that list and then say, candidly for me, how many of them was I actually aware of that I was in the moment, and say, well, only one, right? Cyber. To answer your question, it appeared to me that security was going to be a growth vector for a very long time. It appeared to me that VeriSign at that time, this may sound crazy today, but at that time had the premier brand of security.
Yeah.
Because of the check mark from the SSL certificate business. Ultimately, that was a decision that was made to say, we're not going to do that, and, sold off the SSL certificate business and really fundamentally centered down on the DNS business, which was, a good decision in of itself. VeriSign's a great company. It's done very well, but exited the security space. And at about that time, Palo Alto Networks came around.
But before you go to Palo Alto Networks, how did you land the job at VeriSign as the CEO? I mean, was it an obvious choice that you were the CEO, or there
actually
competition?
Lots of puts and takes in life. So the first time, and I took some time off. But the point of that, and I'll give this people the advice, whether it's 3 or 6 or whatever you can do, I use that time to create a paradigm, and a paradigm means how to think about something, right? And a paradigm is to, what would the perfect thing look like? And I talked to a lot of people. I thought about it, and I came up with a 5-point paradigm and say, if I saw something and it rang all 5 of these bells, I should do it. But for me, the 5 things were, whatever you're selling, whatever it is, a widget, a brick, I don't know, right? Whatever you're selling, that today there exists a large total addressable market for it. Not Gartner says in 3 years it's going to be, and for me, I said, that's got to be $1 billion. That might sound quaint today, but $1 billion, people have to spend at least $1 billion a year on whatever this technology is, right? Not, it's going to spend $1 billion, right? The second thing was that if you could assemble, and as an investor, you'll appreciate this one, like if you could assemble sort of the dream team engineering wise around that technology in the building, they're there. Because as a CEO, you can say, I'm going to get marketing people, sales people, I can do all that stuff. But really great engineers attract really great engineers, right?
Yeah.
I can't do that, right? So do you have the tech dream team in the building that's going to act as the magnet, to bring in increasingly more and more of these outstanding engineers, right? And then the third thing is that there was enough traction around what you were doing that it's far from being de-risked, but you could see it. The traction was there, right? Early enough that people were actually buying it. So you don't end up in the the one everybody uses is beta VCR, whatever that was, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the third thing. The fourth thing is that the technology that this dream team was either developed or developing, that everybody, including the competition, even if it was grudgingly, would admit was disruptive. It doesn't mean that it's going to work, and it doesn't mean that people are going to buy it, but it does mean that people would say, if it worked, well, that would be a really different way to do something that people are already spending $1 billion on, right? And then the fifth thing has an A and a B point to it, which is an investor you might appreciate as well, which was I wanted to be in a private company. It doesn't mean you can't find a public company like that, but I wanted to be in a private company. So I would like, in those cases, for the investors in the company to have two characteristics to it. The first is that the firm has made money in this space before.
As an investor.
Yeah. Like you had a firm that had experience in the space and had made money in this space before. So it's not their first foray into this, because then they would sort of understand the ups and the downs, and so they wouldn't panic in any ways, right? And then the associated 5B would be the people, in this case, the partners, right? The actual partners, because I think people confuse venture firms as just like this this glob, right? It's really the people, right? That the partners who were the investors and on the board had two characteristics. They had made money in this space before, and they, as individual investors, had made money themselves, whether in this space or not. Why is that important, right? So that the partners understand the space already and have some track record in there, and again, won't panic and ideally take a long view. And associated with that they individually don't need to put any points on the board with this company. They want to. It would be great if they did, right? But they don't have to build their brand or make some money by this one, because then they are less likely to do short-term.
They're not using the opportunity to prove to themselves or others that they're good at it. They've already done it before.
They've done it, and this one is financial, which was, as a firm and as a person, of course they want to make money here, but they already have. So it's not this is not the outcome. This company's not the outcome. It's going to make the fund to make the brand of the firm or them as individuals, right? And so if I put all that together, Ultimate Pilots, that was Jim Getz and Ashim.
This is great. I mean, the five are just fantastic. I mean, this is a great model. As you said, it's a paradigm for TAM, team, traction, technology. You just have to come up with the fifth one, starting with the T. And then you would say, this is Mark's 5T rule or something like that.
Never thought about it that way, but
but it's great. But that's a great segue, because this is, Greylock was obviously, a big backer, and Ashim was a backer with you and Palo Alto.
And Sequoia.
And to your fifth point on the firm has done it before, and both those firms had done it before, and particularly, Jim and Ashim had been personally involved in.
So in 2000, so I'm out of VeriSign. I'm not in VeriSign. I'm in this hiatus, working on my paradigm. And Jim and Ashim contact me about Palo Alto Networks.
From Sequoia and from
Greylock. So it's 2008, and they say, we've got this great company. It's got a lot of traction. It's early days, and looking for a CEO, and would you be interested? And I said, yeah, I'd be interested. Right. So I had this paradigm. So I met the team, checked the 5 boxes. I had told myself, if you find the 5 boxes, you take it. How many did you get those? Karen and I talked. I said, this is the 5 boxer. I'd like to do this. Not going to get another one, I don't think. And she said, we'll support you and do what you think is right, but don't want to do it. Our life is here, and the kid, so all things considered, prefer not to, but we'll do it. My kids were younger, but they, we asked them, and they're like, no, don't want to do that, right? And so I passed. It was extremely difficult in some ways and easy in some ways, but at the end of the day, and this kind of goes to larger points in life, right? We say things, but do we do things?
Right.
And most people say family first, and
yeah, of course,
and then drag their family all over the world, and say, boy, that was a great experience for them, right? And maybe it was. I don't know. I'm not judging anything else. In my case, I can only say that when I looked in the mirror and said, my family's saying they don't want to do this. So if I do this, but they said to support me, that means that if I say yes, I've done it for me.
Right.
I can try to kid myself that I've done it for our family. I can say all those things.
Which we all do all the time.
We do. And there's always enough truth in those things, just enough truth to
sound convincing.
To convince yourself, right? And convince others. But I came back and I ran VeriSign then, sold off those businesses I mentioned before, but we kind of got up down to the pure DNS business. And then lo and behold, in 2011, Jim and Ashim called me back. It's 3 years later. And they said, hey, company's done well, couple hundred people now, traction. Like if you go down my list, it's just more solid.
Right.
And
it still met your five
absolutely.
parameters.
If anything, it just underlined a couple of them, more intensely. And they said, we're about to, I won't get into names here, but they said, we're about to make an offer to somebody as the CEO who can take the company public. But the team, they really liked you and I think you like them and wanted to check whether you might. I know it's probably no, but just wanted to check. And I was on a plane, getting on a plane. I said, how long do I have? And he said, today.
And you got off in Chicago, called Karen and...
Yeah, that's what I told you a story. And, so I traded a voicemail. And by the time we landed, she said, kids were 3 years older. Okay. So I called Jim. In this case, it was Jim. Called him back, said, okay, I'm in. And he said, come to the office tomorrow and we'll work out the deal. And I said, I know the guy you're making an offer to. I'll just take his deal. Yeah, he's good. He's a good negotiator. So I took it sight unseen. And
this is a fascinating story. And it sort of says something about you personally, but I think more importantly, the things that we all take for granted when we make decisions. And you seem to have had this inner compass, if you will, of knowing clearly what's important and what the mission is. And I have to assume that some of those early seeds of knowing what you really want, maybe I'm just trying to make it romantic and tying the story, but it feels like, being in West Point, did it contribute to you having such clarity of thought, notwithstanding the day-to-day agony of saying no and struggling with those decisions? I have to assume that there is something in your past that guided you.
So at West Point, we learned a number of things, and they were, at the time they sounded like trite statements, but they're really true, it turns out, in life. And one that I learned there was leaders lead. Okay, well that sounds nice, right? But like, what does that actually mean to lead people, right? It means put the team in front of you, and you're in the Army. They teach you, when you do the field march all day long, and you come into, you're going to make your set up your position for the night, right? First thing you do is take care of your equipment, because if your equipment breaks, you got a real problem, right? Then you take care of your troops. Are they fed and check their feet and all these things, right? And when that's all done, take care of yourself. Like that's what a leader does, So like applying that in the business world, I actually think can give you a lot of peace and direction when you do the things that actually imply or demonstrate character and values and the things that we all think we are, right? And so I've had my opportunities to do those things, and I've had my challenges around that as well.
Yeah. But fast forward, you took it public, and you grew the company, 5x in your tenure. 2018 comes, and also is today about more than $100 billion in market cap, and really a remarkable success story. And right at that pinnacle, you have another profound decision to make, and family has grown, and you decide to hang up the boots and really focus on the family.
Sure.
And talk about that.
Yeah. So like I say, Karen and I, we have 3 kids, 28-year-old daughter who's product manager at Zoom, doing great, a 25-year-old who's actually at a tech startup here. And then we had a late in life baby at age 45. We had Andy. And So Andy came along, and at the time, so he's basically born when I joined Palo Alto Networks.
Right.
Like he's my Palo Alto Networks kid, right? So
And you never saw him for
yeah,
the first 6 years.
Yeah, it's like less than I would wish, right? But so he gets to be 7 years old. I'm in my 7th year of being the CEO, and you mentioned this before in the introduction, but Palo Alto Networks was a once in a lifetime opportunity. I got the chance to work with the greatest people in the world, and it wasn't all roses. Like we had our ups and we had our downs, but we were in a growth industry with great technology and wonderful people, and it was working, right? So we enjoyed a good degree of success as a team, and we were in the firefights together, and I couldn't have a tighter bond, right? In team as you do. And however, Andy's 7, and I have 2 older kids who were amazing and wonderful. I was rarely home for them, except on the weekends, right? And we all know this. If you're a parent, right? Everybody knows this, that the difference between 7 and 17, in hindsight, I like to say is 10 minutes. In hindsight, right? We all know that later. People have told us that when kids were 7, and do you action anything about that, right? You just go, oh yeah, they grow up quickly, right?
Yeah.
I knew that. I had an object lesson in front of me. It was like, I have 2 older kids that if I could hit the replay button, would it mean that I wouldn't do these jobs and everything? No, I definitely would have done them. But would I have, do I know now that I could have carved out, dialed back certain things to be there for them? Absolutely. I could have done that and still been successful, right? I think. So Andy's 7, and I start waking up at night literally going, what are you doing? If you're, you have a shot with a 3rd kid to be very important in their life. You don't have to be. You could keep doing what you're doing, and nobody would blank about that, right? But it really started to bother me, back to those disposition and self-awareness, to say, why are you doing this? Right? So I came to the conclusion, I'll spare all the ups and downs, over time, not overnight, to say, I would like to refocus and spend more time at home with Andy. Now, I have to mention that there's a whole story to this, I'll spare you, but Karen had homeschooled all our kids. Okay, so to be at home didn't mean just be at home. It meant be at home and try to be a teacher too, right? A full-time or a part-time job, right? Monday through Friday to do that. So I made that decision. It was very, very difficult decision. I spoke to the board about it. I said, I got to go. It has nothing to do with Palo. It's like, it's a very personal thing. Let's figure that out. We did over time, not overnight. And I left and went home. And since that time, I've been a teacher Monday through Friday. And it was extraordinarily difficult decision
to adjust your fast-paced life to a more of a coach, mentor, teaching kind of a role.
Yeah, to do my, I said, hey, this is what I would tell people today. Like, on Friday night, I went home, and I was relevant in the business community, because I was the I was the chairman and CEO of Palo Alto Networks, which is an important company in cybersecurity. I was very relevant, but I was not as relevant as I wanted to be at home. And then Monday morning, I woke up and I was not completely irrelevant, but that trailed, that has a half-life, right? When you're not in a position, but it gave me the opportunity that I took, and I'm super glad it did. I became very relevant to at least one kid in the world.
That's
Andy and Karen too, more ways than I could imagine. But that was a choice. It was very, very difficult to make.
But this is a great pivot, because you're in your current life, post 2018, 2019, you've now taken on board positions at Qualcomm and Snowflake and Rubrik and other places. In a way, it's obviously it's very different than homeschooling Andy, but I'm not suggesting that you're schooling or mentoring Cristiano or the guys in the same level. But the reality is that as a board chairman at Qualcomm, your role is very different. You're really playing a role of sort of, pulling the entire board together, setting the agenda, sort of solving some gnarly issues on succession and all of that. And so can you touch on that experience? Because I recall you were there on the board of Qualcomm when Paul Jacobs was there and Steve Mollenkopf, who was the CEO prior to Cristiano. So you managed that transition. Were you there when the transition from Paul to Steve happened, or?
Steve had just taken over, and when I joined the board, and then I was the chairman for the transition from Steve to Cristiano.
So can you talk about the dynamics? Because obviously you don't have to get into the details if it's confidential, but transitions in life in general for your own self, as you so eloquently sort of walk through in your own life, are difficult. But now you're sort of a chairman of a company, and you have to sort of help facilitate those transitions. How easy is that? Or, in this case, particularly, at least in Qualcomm case, can you talk about how that transition was to Cristiano?
Sure. If I just come to the end of it for a minute and say, at Qualcomm, we're extraordinarily fortunate to have Steve.
Yeah.
And extraordinarily fortunate that we had Cristiano as the president of QCT at the time. So the setup was good, right? To get a good outcome on that. I've been through a number of those transitions of leaving VeriSign, leaving Palo Alto, and helping bring Nikesh in, and I was the chairman there and chairman of Qualcomm. So a number of and we just did a CEO transition at Snowflake, Frank to Sridhar, right?
Sridhar, yeah.
So I've had a fair share of experience in this. And but specifically to
but here you were more directly involved.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And that's where I was going to go. Specifically to the chairman role, I think it's important to understand what is the chairman's job? What's the board's job? And then what's the chairman's job, right? And there's a lot of stuff you can do, and but at the end of the day, the board's number one responsibility, in my opinion, is who's running the company.
Yeah,
right? And then there's a lot after that, right? But number one. And then the chairman's job is to ensure that the cohesivity and smooth functioning of the board and the CEO all the time. And also, if there are transitions that need to be made, to be the one who's really on point, to make those things happen, right? And there's a lot of other stuff chairmans can do. My view on that is, my way I do things is be in a background. Not actually, very few people know I'm the chairman of Qualcomm, and I think that's a good thing. How can it help the company to know, if I'm out advertising? So be in the background and make things, try to make things happen smoothly as best you can, because having been a CEO as well, CEOs are hard charging, working constantly all the time. And the board is just one constituency that they need to work with.
Right.
They have investors, they have teams, they have partners, they have all sorts of people to work, right? And I think that CEOs can be going so fast and then forget that you only touch base once every 90 days, right? So, it's the chairman's job, I think, to ensure that there's.
But you're also dealing with, in this case particularly, maybe it may have been a little different given the fact that neither Cristiano nor Steve are founders, and you're not the founder of the company. So is it easier to have the tough conversations? If I'm not suggesting that Qualcomm had those issues, but is it easier in general as in the board when you're dealing with transitions or having tough conversations when the founder is not involved?
Steve's case, I think he's Qualcomm 32 years, so he's not founder, but for somebody who's that's all I ever did. I came out of college, went to work at Qualcomm. There's a difference, but you get enough time in the seat. Some of those differences disappear into the background. I think really if I put Qualcomm aside for a second, because I could use Palo Alto Networks here, so it just say companies change and evolve over time with market conditions, with competitions, all sorts of stuff, right? And you have to adapt to that and leg up. So what does a good transition look like from a CEO perspective? It would be that ideally the company was in a good position, and then the next person legs it up to the next good position, and then another person's going to come in like that's actually a good transition. Ideally, you'd make transitions. Things are working well.
Yeah.
And now this is the person for the next leg of the journey, right?
Right.
And in Qualcomm's case, I'd say, yeah, that was the case. Steve, Qualcomm had a lot of issues, right? But Steve managed through all those issues and got it into the position to say, there's a growth business now, not one that's playing defense relative to all these legal issues.
Right.
And Cristiano is a growth guy, right? So the right person at the right time. And Nikesh at Palo Alto Networks legged Palo Alto Networks up into the cloud and SaaS in lots of different ways.
Yeah, but it's fascinating because I think as a early stage venture capital firms, Celesta, we're involved with much different scale of problems and issues to deal with in the board, and as well as some of my partners and I always talk about, in the Valley, being founder friendly is usually talked about, very positively, where in reality, you should be business friendly. You need to make sure you're doing the right things for the company. And if in that process, you have to make some decisions about transitions, it's clearly much easier when you're a much smaller private company. But the core of it, you're dealing with people. What is your style? I mean, I'm sure in your experiences in the various boards that you're on, I'm sure there are situations where you're having to have some very tough conversations. What's the one thing that, or a few ideas that you would give people? That how do you approach the tough conversations? I mean, is it just be blunt and be crystal clear, or do you use a different approach? Or what is your style?
I think you said the answer, which is you're dealing with people. Every person is a person. They have their own life, their own issues they're dealing with, right? And there's an intersection. This is business, right? So there's an intersection point for all of us in our personal lives and the business you're associated with. And you're fortunate when those things intersect for a time where it's all working. They will not intersect forever. Somebody gets sick, right? You're going to move to a different state. I don't know, right? But
or the business changes,
or the business needs change, right? But this intersection point, if you can hit the intersection point and you get 3, 5, 7, I don't know, maybe 10 years time, where it's working because the intersection works, you should be grateful for that, and you need to be aware of that as a leader. Be aware of that with people, right? And then say there may be times when the intersection is not going to work anymore. We scaled past you, right? Or skill sets change, or
your priorities change, like in the ways of your case where your family became a higher priority.
Something happens, right?
Yeah.
You call in rich, right? I don't know, right?
Right.
There's a lot of things that can happen there, and not try to ride it too long on the intersection when it doesn't matter anymore, right? And so I think that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And I think generally for hard charging business people, particularly in Silicon Valley and tech, things move very quickly. And if you don't actually take the time with people as individuals, you are probably going to make those intersection points shorter than they could be. On the other hand, sometimes people let them go too long. So it's a very personal thing. And I find that being a leader, whether it's a board or CEO, whatever the case is about, are you willing to put time into the people, right? Mm-hmm. There are some people whose style is say, this is just business, right? And they're super blunt and they don't take the extra time. And look, that works sometimes, right? It usually works when the business is working, and it usually has its consequences if the business is not working, because loyalty is about an inch deep then, right?
Yeah.
Maybe like a financial transaction. So that's not my style. My style is I'd like to know who you are.
Right. It's interesting because I think the famous line is, people don't remember what you tell them. They remember how you made them feel. So even in the tough conversations, if you made them feel, that you're being honest and authentic, and it seems like that's a huge trait in your life and the various experiences you've had. Let's switch to some of the more recent things. In addition to obviously Qualcomm and Snowflake, these are big companies. These are companies that are potentially category defining leaders in their respective areas. But you're also involved in much, much earlier stage companies, Autoscape, you and I are involved in that, along with Autodyne, in security, and you're involved in AI. Talk about your excitement in AI. I mean, cybersecurity and AI are very integrally, correlated, because there are lots of ways by which you can get very sophisticated in the security business. So talk about the AI aspect of, is that the reason why you're getting involved in earlier companies?
To some extent. So I think you remember I said before, all of us, you have been better at this than me, just looking at your CV, right?
Yeah.
Say, as an investor, if you're around long enough, you're going to live through a number of technology shifts. The question is whether you even know it, right? And if you do know it, do you want to be involved in it? And if so, right, how to do that? And so I think AI is for sure one of them. I don't know how it's going to play out. We all have, but it's for sure one of them. So I'm pretty interested in it. But AI kind of hits a lot of different points of where I'm putting my time. So not only is security going to be fundamentally changed by AI, and like Autoscape, for example, as a player there, but also data.
Yeah.
And also compute, right? So the things that Qualcomm doing, for example, around AI are very, very interesting. So it's probably outside of cybersecurity, the only one of the tectonic shifts that I've actually been aware enough to say, hey, this is happening, right? I'd like to know more about it and have the ability to be a student and try to meet really smart people who have an opinion and put all these puzzle pieces together. Not for any specific outcome, because it's interesting. And I'm in a position which is very fortunate to get to work with. I get to do what I want to do, work with people I want to work with, which is not something everybody gets to do. So I'm fortunate that way. And the companies I'm associated with, whether they're the publicly traded ones or I'm an investor or advisor to dozens, kind of have that theme. And
do you impedance match the way you help these companies and coach them as they are small versus, a Qualcomm or Palo Alto at a bigger level? Do you have to tweak anything in your approach with these companies?
Yeah, I think everything's stage appropriate.
Right.
So the outside of the publicly traded companies, and by the way, when I left Palo Alto Networks, if you would have caught me then, this is one of those, be careful about your expectations. If you'd caught me when I left Palo Alto Networks, I would have told you 100% certainty I won't sit on any public company boards after, eventually I'd get off Palo Alto Networks, which I did after 5 years, but I'm not going to do that, after I'm off Qualcomm, Palo Alto Networks. Someday I'll be off Qualcomm, who knows, right? Yet here I am on 3, publicly traded boards, right?
Yeah.
I would have told you I probably wouldn't be living in Silicon Valley right now. Almost certainly I wouldn't be. And
you're here in Saratoga.
And here I am. And, so, be careful about setting your own expectations, right? And be open to those things. Most of the work, almost entirely, that I do outside these publicly traded boards is because folks, either like yourself or like Lightspeed or Sequoia or Greylock or Advent, people I've gotten to know over time have called me and said, hey, we've got this really interesting young company with this really interesting, young CEO who we would love to talk to you about your experiences. And one commonality in all those is they're usually a hypergrowth situation or potential hypergrowth, and the CEO has humility and self-awareness, right? Otherwise, I don't want to spend time with them. And so
at least it's capable of being coached to get that.
Yeah. But they're at least open to it, right? So when I get the chance or an opportunity, I'll talk with somebody, and I'm not trying to do anything. It's not a business for me in any way. It's more like a give back to talk to somebody once, right? And then they'll say, this is what I'm doing. And I'll say, oh, here's my thoughts about that, right? And I don't know, the next percent of the time, then there's a second call and a third call, and then X percent of the time they say, hey, would you like to invest in the company or be involved with this? And so I've kind of fallen into that in a way that for me is interesting. I get to meet great people 100% of the time with those people. They could be 26, they could be 35, they could be 47, and a third time seat. It doesn't matter, right? 100% of the time, our conversations will always tend towards at some point life, and all the decisions and how do you deal with stuff, things we were talking about before. And to that extent, there's one common thing that we all have, and it's we only have so much time, and how am I spending it? And we always talk business, but we always talk about not because I'm trying, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all dealing with those things.
So how this is truly remarkable, Mark. I mean, it's just great to listen to you. It sounds like as much as technology is a big factor in you getting attracted to, getting involved in any one thing or the other. It sort of goes back to the 5-point paradigm. You're measuring what you're going to commit your time to through a different lens. And that lens seems to, sort of composite image of, the people, the personal situation, the market opportunity, and what you can do, and some core values. Where do you get all this continued inspiration? I mean, what do you read? What do you listen to? What's on your nightstand?
Things have modified on that over time, but I would say 2 categories primarily have been consistent for a long time. Particularly when I was running companies, I would enjoy reading about leaders who are in crisis situations. Almost none of them were business leaders, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I really don't read business books at all, right? But it was just about leadership. And
who do you put at the top of that list for you?
Winston Churchill, I mean, there'll be some of the obvious ones. There'll be a lot less obvious ones where you go, I never heard of that guy or that lady before, right?
Sure.
But, kind of go deep into these different segments all the way back into the 1600s, right? And say these people were in these situations and they did something that was very hard. Usually the hard thing they did was to, do the right thing versus the popular thing, right? And take a long view and sometimes burn their own reputation in the process and finish themselves, right, from a career perspective, but yet they did the right thing. And so I take a lot of, I would read and continue to read about those folks. And then, and we all have our own version of this. My version of this, I'm going to put it on the spiritual side, is say, and you can call it philosophical, you can call it whatever you want, but say, what are we doing here? And
are you a religious person?
Very,
Okay.
I hadn't been for all my life kind of thing, but the longer I live, the more I come to some conclusions that you can call them religious. You can go to them because I know I've spent time with Hinduism and Catholicism and Christianity, a bunch of different things, but there's a commonality, right, in all of that, which is, what are you doing here? And how are you going to treat people along the way? Are you a giver? Are you a taker? Right. And it doesn't really matter about what you think happens next.
Right.
It's just about, what about this moment?
Yeah.
And it all has come back to that one point I would leave you with, which for me would be back to that. Just be self-aware. Like, you can't be good with other people unless you're good with yourself.
Yeah.
I find that to be impossible. But minimally, you're not going to be good with other people unless you're at peace with yourself. That doesn't mean that you have to be happy all the time and you have to have everything. I'm happy, I'm healthy, I'm rich, I'm all these things. Doesn't mean that whatsoever. It just means know why you're doing stuff.
Yeah.
So that you can be at peace with it. And then you can actually interact with people in a way that you're a giver, not a taker every time.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I think you're just a fascinating person. I can spend hours just talking to you, because I think there's a incredible simplicity to what you're saying and what guides you. Yet it is so difficult for a lot of people to practice it. And you seem to have done that exceptionally well in your life, in your professional career, in your family situation. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm really looking forward to many more opportunities for us to do stuff together. And it'll be a true joy. And thanks for doing this.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much for giving me the time.
Yeah, fantastic. And hopefully we'll have you back again when one or more of our companies have other teachable moments that we can talk about.
That'd be wonderful.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Tech Surge podcast from Celesta Capital. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it, subscribe, or leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. We'll be back every 2 weeks with more insights and discussions of all things deep tech. Bye for now.